Great. I see we've got a number of people joining in. We're still a minute before the start time, so we'll give time for more people to join. We will be underway very shortly with our webinar today. So just hold tight, we'll get started in just a minute or so. Right, I do see we've got a number of people still joining in. The webinar is going to start in just a moment. It's going to be a very informative session. So let's just give people time to join in. We'll get started in just 30 seconds or so. Okay. Welcome. I see we've got a good number of people joining in. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is James Bent. I'm VP of Solution Engineering at Virtuoso. And today's webinar is, as you can see on screen, 7 ways to use AI in testing, which I can see by the number of people joining in, I think is a really great topic given where we are with both AI and thinking about testing. Just to let you know, the session today is being recorded. I will give time for Q&A at the end, and you will be able to access the recording once the session is finished if you want to watch back or share it with any of your colleagues. Now, the nice thing with having such a topic as 7 ways to use AI in testing is that we're going to do exactly what it says on the tin. We're going to show you 7 different ways that you can use AI in testing, learning how Virtuoso is introducing AI-powered test automation. And that will include, we'll take a deep dive look at 7 key AI capabilities that Virtuoso has already deployed. We'll take a look at how each of those capability works, what problem it solves and the benefit it brings. And then in turn, how each of those capabilities is used to empower testers. And I think that's something I'm really keen to stress with anybody at the moment is that AI is not going to replace people. It's not going to replace testers. It is empowerment. And I will, throughout the session, be doing a live demo of AI capabilities in action. But before we do that, so I'm going to do a quick intro of Virtuoso. Some of you already may know us because you use us. Some have maybe heard of us by name, and some maybe you haven't heard of us at all. So just very quickly, we are an AI-powered natural language-based test automation platform to speed testing by empowering non-engineers, but also engineers can use it, to create self-maintaining automation in the cloud. We're not used for everything. We're not covering every single testing use case. We're used to automate UI and integration testing for browser-based applications, which could be both front-end browser apps, but also sort of back-end, back-office systems. And it is low code, it is autonomous in as much that it's driven by robotic automation, but is very much powered by AI, as well as machine learning and self-healing. And we'll take a look into that. Now, before we get into AI, I do want to sort of set the scene because we did run a webinar just a few weeks ago, which was around generative AI and what that's really going to start doing for us. And I think, it's really important to note, I did sort of make the point just previously that, where is AI really going to sit? Because I'm sure some people are kind of either nervous that it's going to run completely autonomously. Is it going to work as expected? And frankly, there's probably people wondering, is it going to replace me? And the answer is, for me, when particularly now we're bringing in AI, we're seeing how it's being used. If we ask these questions, is it autonomous or assistive? Is it going to replace people or empower them? Is it going to do everything always? And is it all seeing, all singing, all dancing? The answer is it's assistive. It's to empower people. It definitely isn't going to do everything always. And it's not yet all seeing, all dancing, all singing. But AI will let us do great things. And that's not just in testing, but in our domain, we are talking about how it's going to empower us within testing. So rest assured, and I would say embrace it, because it's going to really help you do your best within testing and QA. And really, I guess there's also another question, which is why bother? You know, we don't just do things just because they're hot topics and everyone's talking about AI. Why would we even use that in testing and QA? And I think for me, what I'm going to show you is that, you know, AI really helps you it enables, it assists. You'll see some of our generative AI helps lay the foundation of testing. It gets you going faster. It almost works like a developer does to help you refactor and repeat versus writing things from scratch. And, you know, in many cases, like probably I would imagine many people would say, AI or not, automation, not really there to do 100% of testing. You use AI and automation to sort of test as much as can be automated, but then you're going to free up time to do if you like, the real QA, getting your hands on. Challenges with AI, and in fact, any automation, is for all intents and purposes, there are no web standards. Every application can be developed differently. But I will show you how we really help to address that challenge. And not all is as it appears. So with single page applications, sometimes the page hasn't even loaded what you need to interact with, or the things that will appear when you transition things. So again, AI doesn't know everything, particularly if it hasn't loaded yet. But look, we're not really here to sort of discuss the philosophical areas of AI. It's really about saying, let's take a look. It's a practical session for 7 ways to look at how AI is actually working. And I'm going to be jumping between screens here because I want to sort of introduce things and then actually get straight into showing a bit of a live demo. So number one for us, I think at the core, we are natural language based, which simply means if I want to write, let's say, a test step to click a login button, you just write click on, and then if the login button says login, I would say click on login. You don't have to build page object models. You don't have to find selectors or build keywords. We are using AI to then go through and locate those elements. So it's about saying it makes it really easy for me to write in very close to sort of pure natural language without really necessarily understanding what's going on behind the scenes in the application and without doing any real setup. And to give an example of that, I've got an application here. It's a dummy insurance portal. And let's say I want to go and log in. So I might say I'm going to wait for, in this case, an element on the screen to load. I'm going to put in a dynamic wait, just because I know that this page sometimes takes a few seconds to load. But then when we get into the real writing of the test steps, I want to put a username into the username fields. Now I've already got a username parameter set up in an environment. So I've done a little bit of setup just to say I've got my environment variable set up. So I'm going to pull in the username. But the key thing then is if I look at the screen, it says username. I'm using natural language. I'm using the label it says on the screen. I haven't done any setup of a keyword or defined any selectors or build a library of those. I write the natural language, and when I press enter, we're using bots with AI to go and find the username field and write on the screen. I could do the same with the password. Let's go and put the password into, it says password on the screen. I'm just using what it says on the screen to go ahead and write my test. Then I could do things though, like what happens if I want to click this checkbox? Well, it doesn't have a label. So you can imagine there might be multiple checkboxes on the screen. So I could say, look for the remember me text, because that's next to it. So look for remember me. And then I could say, click on, and the checkbox is to the left. So click on the left checkbox, because that's the type of element it is. And by doing that, because I've sort of positioned the box and say, look for remember me, and then click on the left checkbox, it's gone and interacted with it. And then finally, I can say, click on the login button. So it's about using natural language syntax with what I see on the screen to be able to go and start writing my test steps. And where you saw the test steps running immediately, we call that live authoring. So as I write the test step, we see it running immediately. So live authoring with AI to go and start writing my test steps without any real understanding of things like selectors or XPath or IDs or the code behind it. I could then, let's say I want to wait for this text to load. Well, there's a lot of text for there. So I could go and click on the text, drop and just pick it, and it's gone and put the text in for me. And then I want to click on the button V insurance. So I could say click button. So give a little what we call a guess selector. Click button V insurance. And again, we go and find the button called V insurance. So very quickly, I've logged in and now I've got the insurance policy page open here. So using natural language with AI to go and locate elements, even if we're don't have something that's labeled or we've got to provide a bit of context, to very quickly go and build that out. So when we talk about using natural language with AI to go and locate elements, that's what we're talking about, to identify objects on the screen. Now, the next one is, if we look at then having, so we're I could say low code. So while we have a lot of out of the box syntax, like click or write or press or mouse actions or assertions, we've only got so many because there's only so many standard functions, if you like, that you can really utilize. But there are times when actually you want to generate your own natural language. So what this allows you to do is to generate your own natural language command, which is driven by JavaScript, even if you don't know JavaScript. So a simple example of that could be, let's say I want to come in now and create a new customer. So let's go to the new customer and say, click new customer. That's the button I want to interact with. So again, I can see on the screen, I want to interact with the new customer button. It went and ran that. We're capturing, by the way, screenshots, so I can see the interactions to make sure they're working. I can check as I'm going, it's all doing the right thing. And maybe now I want to put in a full name, but I want that to be a random value. So what I could do is say, we don't have a function to say randomly create a full name, but you could come into what we call our extensions, and you could create, let's say it could be generate full name. You could say a natural language command that I want to put into my test. So generate full name. And now what I can do is create JavaScript. But if I don't know that, how to put JavaScript and to create a full name, I could just put into our little AI assistant to say, create a woman's full name randomly. So just put in a natural language command of what I want the code to be created. It goes and creates the JavaScript for me. I can add that in. I do need to add just one line to return back the output of that function. But otherwise now I've just created my own natural language command. So I could come in and say in my test, generate full name, and then returning to a variable. So just I want to return that and store that into a data point. And we'll see in a second that that's gone ahead and generated a name for me. So very quickly, I've created my own natural language with JavaScript, even though I don't know it. And genuinely, I couldn't write JavaScript to save my life. And now I could say, let's write the full name. And now we look in the screen and we see the full name box. And I go ahead and I've generated a full name randomly, and I've now written it onto the screen. I could equally do things like, let's say I wanted to create a date. So I could say date in a full format, for example. So I could say, again, go to my AI generator. I've given it a natural language name, and I could say create tomorrow's date in, could be Tuesday, 16th of April, 2024 format. So I'm just telling it what I want it to create, and it goes ahead and writes the JavaScript for me. There we go. And again, then I just return the output of the function very quickly so that then I could put into my test. And if then I go and immediately then run that, so I could say date full format, returning tomorrow, then it goes ahead and it's basically in this case creating data. Now I could use it for more than that, but it's just a very simple example of how it's going ahead and very quickly allowing you to extend the platform to make it work, based on your exact use cases if you need slightly different functions, but they're still basically in natural language. You can put instructions in here as well. So that's and this is actually one of a capability that's used by so many of our customers to extend the platform really quickly and easily without having to go and find an engineer to do that for you. Now, another key area that we're using AI for, this is one of the core capabilities, I think, for us. And it links into object identification. It's basically self-healing, which is a term that a lot of people use, but very few are actually necessarily doing it in quite the way that we are. In as much as we're using AI to go and say where there are dynamic changes in the application. So I picked a login button. When I first picked it, it had an XPath and an ID and a class name. Then that's fine, I captured that. But then when I run the test again, maybe because at a re-release, or maybe every time, every time I run this, the application, the database is assigning new IDs to the buttons and form fields. When I run the test again, the application has dynamically changed and the selectors I had before for that button no longer work. So we're using AI to be able to go ahead and self-heal those test steps. Now, what that actually looks like is I'm going to show you, and I have an application that is dynamic. So let's create a small segment, a checkpoint in our test. I'm actually going to navigate to a new application in the same test. This is actually really useful because it helps to demonstrate that one of the key use cases for us that our customers use is end-to-end testing across browser-based applications, because in the same test, I can have multiple applications open. So I've opened this new application. I'm now going to say, look for the Comet integration. And then I'm going to say, click on add to bag. Now, the reason for doing that is I know that this particular element is dynamic. Now, as you can see, I've quickly gone through and written a whole bunch of test steps. Now what I'm going to do is kind of finalize that. And what that does is it goes ahead and captures all the selectors, so XPaths and IDs, classes, basically whatever's available for each element, and builds that initial model for each of those test steps. So it's going to rerun it and just basically make sure that's all working. So with that in place, you can see this add to bag, it's going to collect IDs and classes, particular, very specific selectors. However, if those change, the test is not going to stop running. You're not going to have to maintain it. And I'm going to show you an example of that. I'm going to run this test twice, and we'll see that the test starts running. So by the way, we're not just an authoring tool, we're your grid. You can run the tests on our platform. You can run them in parallel at scale. And you get immediate natural language readable test results with screenshots captured, so you can go ahead and see exactly what your test is doing. But one key thing that's happening here is that as the test is running, we're basically re-identifying all the elements in the test. And if we can see there are changes, then you'll see this little sticking plaster or Band-Aid, depending if you might be in the States. You'll see this little icon appear on your test results. That's a healing point. So as we can see here, for that particular element, it's actually the Comet integration, not the button. The Comet integration label, you can see the classes change dynamically. So that could be the database assigning those. Now, it's not just limited to class changes. It could be the XPath or IDs. It could be JS paths. It could be the label. If you've written a test in English and you're running again on the same site, but it's in Spanish, for example. Basically, you're getting real-time healing of the test with dynamic changes that are automatically healed. And we do this very successfully. We've got a large number of customers who use this every single day and basically see the maintenance burden in their testing reduce by an order of 95% plus. They just don't have to sit maintaining tests because of dynamic changes. So you've got the AI object identification and the AI self-healing, which basically means that as you write the test, it keeps on running because we're re-identifying, taking into account the dynamic changes. Now, I do see someone's put their hand up there. What I'll do is I will give time towards the end of the session for questions, if that's okay. So do please put anything in the chat and I will come to your questions towards the end. Okay, Now, another area I sort of mentioned that we talked around, one of the key use cases customers use us for is end-to-end testing. So it could be a CRM into ERP, into warehouse management systems, basically integrated business systems. Now, to test across those applications, you're typically going to be building in not just single scenarios, but you're going to be data driving those scenarios with different sort of permutations, different versions of the test. So a good example of that, if we go back to our customer details, we could come in and say, let's switch back to the previous tab so we can control which tab we're in. And you can see it will switch across and we're back into the insurance portal. So you can see here that I've got a form field that I want to fill in. And I don't want to put the data in a test. I want to keep it separate and I want to have different scenarios I can pass through this test. So in here, I could come across and I've got the title, street address, city, country, email address. I want to generate test data for that, but I don't want to have to go and create that myself. So I could come across into our test data. Now you could upload a CSV file of your data to be able to load in, but if it is more just that generic data, we then have an AI data generator that lets you put in and say, I want you to create me 10 rows of data with these fields in it, and it will go through and generate that for you. So as an example of that, we could go in and say, let's create 5 records with title, with full name, street address, with town, email, and phone number, all in the US. So I can give sort of a natural language command, and it will go and generate for me exactly what I've asked it to do. And it will always sort of be contextualized data. And then I could give that a name, so say customers 5 US, and you'll see it's given me email addresses which match into the names. It gives me US phone numbers and cities. So I've kind of got this data set very quickly that I want to be able to use. Now what I could do is go back into my test. I could assign the test data table, and I could save that, and I'll just rerun this so it picks up the data. And basically now, when that's just run through, I'm going to be able to use the test data I've generated. But if we jump back across here, because I've created 5 scenarios, I'm going to be able to run the same test 5 different times using 5 different data sets. So very useful when you get into that data-driven testing of end-to-end business systems. So what we're going to do is come in and we'll just wait for it to jump back through to the customer details, and we'll start writing our test steps, but use the test data we've just had AI generate for us to be able to then drive that. So the first thing I'm going to do now, I already know the insurance type here. That's the system specific value. So I'm going to say pick the value from the drop down, which is insurance type. So again, I'm interacting with a specific type of element here using natural language, and it's gone ahead and picked that for me. I could then say, write the title, which comes from my test data in title. I could write, and let's see, we've got it called full name with a space. So we could say, write the full name in the full name field. So again, I'm mapping together my test data with the testing fields. I could write my street address. And the great thing here, you can see the speed at which I can write this, but the fact it's all in natural language means that it's readable. I can tie it to test data. It's running as I'm doing it. So I can check to see if anything goes wrong, and I could fix that immediately if I wanted. Very, very easy for me to go and write the tests here. I'm going to pick US from the drop-down country. So again, interacting with the drop-down field. And then I could write my email address into the email address field. And again, it really is kind of good how much control I've got when I'm doing this, but also the fact it's sort of the speed at which I can write this and see that everything's working. So let's go write the phone number into the phone number field. Now I saw there that if you notice the email address didn't write in the box. So I can go back here and see that actually it's because the value is just called email. So I made a bit of a mistake, but instead of saying, well, now to come and run the test right from the start, I could actually come in and adjust that. So I could say, let's change that to email, because that's the value that's in the test data. And because the screen's in the right place, I can choose to just run from that test step, and we'll see that it's now gone and written the email address into the field. And then finally, I can say, click on save. So very quickly, I'm writing my test, I'm mapping in test data, which I've generated using AI. I can see that it all works because it's on the screen and all the test steps are working. I'm basically very quickly using AI and natural languages together with test data to be able to very quickly build a test, including factoring in my own functions to this. But the great thing is there's still more. So now, one of the troubles in testing, of course, is once you've written the test, not everyone knows what the test is doing. So rather than have people sort of come in and say, well, let's try and read through this and read the test steps and work out what this test is doing, what we enable with AI also is to have what we call journey summaries. So you can add in summaries of what the test is doing. Now you can write this manually. You could just write in your own summary to say, this is what the test is doing, this is the intent, and so on and so forth. But we've also got an AI assistant that will do that for you. And really what that's really helping you to do is to help people to very quickly understand their tests, particularly if they don't know, sort of have the context about it or they're learning from it. But it also helps to say if that summary makes sense, it probably suggests that the structure of that test is quite good. And to do that, we can come across and we look in the journey summary and we can say, let's create a summary. Again, I could write that in there, but I could go into AI and say, let's summarize my test. And you can see it said that the purpose of this is to test the process of creating a new customer in the web application. It starts logging in, logs in with the username and password. You then open V-Insurance, you create a new customer. It goes across, wasn't really part of the test. We were just showing functions to be able to test in another website, adding an item to the cart. We then switch back, fill in the customer details, and then save to complete the process. That's exactly what the test is doing, which means I can add that in. And now without anybody actually having to open the test, they can read through a summary of that and know exactly what the purpose of that test is doing. So very quickly, it's another great way, sort of a productivity tool to be able to make it, easily add those summaries, which are very accurate and useful to lots of users. Coming in, of course, I've showed you sort of some key capabilities of how AI helps to write the tests. We have a lot more capability, of course, some of which is not using AI. There are lots more functions and features as you would expect when you write your tests. We're really focusing on those that use AI in this session. But in any case, we've looked here a lot about authoring the tests, but then if you remember, we are also your grid. This is where you run your tests. This is where you report on your tests. And if you think about it, testing really is actually the output of the test and the ability to understand it. And what it tells you is probably one of the key points in testing. Authoring tests is really just a means to get you to that point of understanding. Is what you're testing, does it have quality? Is it working as expected, as designed, and so on and so forth? Sometimes, however, that's actually quite difficult to understand. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of hard code a failure into this. So I'm going to say, click on fail, which is something that simply doesn't exist in the application. The test step has failed. What I'm going to do that as if we found that when the test was running. So when it was being executed, which, by the way, you can put this into an execution planner to orchestrate and build out how you're going to run your tests. You can choose to data drive this. So I could say, which test do I want? Do I want them data driven? With which rows of data? Which environments do I want to be able to use? You can run this through CI/CD or on schedules. Basically, you've got the full tools to be able to orchestrate and run these. They can be run in parallel. But basically then in the project activity here, this is where your test results reside. These are all your jobs, if you like. You can filter this out. You can search for dates, particular testing packs or goals and outcomes. Well, you can see here, the one that we've just run, it's failed. And we kind of expect that because we put in something, an element that doesn't exist. Now in our test result, we can see This was run on our staging environment. We can go through all the test steps and see step by step with all screenshots. It's very readable using the natural language. You've got step level timings, as well as things like we're capturing network requests and console logs. But then if we scroll down, we can see exactly where this test step has failed. It's failed on the click on fail, which is spelt very badly. So I can see the screenshots, I can see the sequence of steps, I can start to understand kind of what's going on. But if I can't figure out exactly what happened there, or if what's probably the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try and rerun it. And if it comes again, I'm probably going to log a ticket with the engineer to say something failed, I couldn't really understand it, But the engineer might say, well, it's kind of simple. The element wasn't there, your test's wrong, or the data wasn't there. So to help people out, firstly, we do have a root cause analysis. So it says target element not found, which, great, that's some sort of suggestion. We do give details like the page source and the page network and page console logs, but it's not really specifically telling me what went wrong in detail. So what we now have, we're using AI to analyze the failure, and it will go through, and it's basically bundling together all the information from here, passing that through into AI to kind of say, can you help me understand why this might have failed? And in this case, this is quite a simple one. It's just the element's not there. But this could be, for your information, you can include API calls. So you could do functional UI using UI steps and APIs. So for instance, if the API is returned to 401, you don't know what a 401 is. Or if, let's say, there's an issue on the server, and that's captured in the network event. This actually starts to be able to give some quite good insights. This one has come up with 3 particular examples. The first is, so it couldn't pass the click on fail because the element wasn't on the page, which could be due to a typo, it not existing. The application might have changed, and it gives a suggestion of how to fix it. Maybe it was dynamically loaded and you needed to have a wait before, or maybe it was recently changed or removed. It's starting to give you as a tester things that you could go back and actually check before you jump to passing this to an engineer, so that maybe you can say, well, yeah, actually, it's a typo. I can just go back into the test and say what I really meant to do was, click on, it could be another element, for example. And maybe that's could be the new policy. So why don't I just go and update that, put that in, and it reruns the test, and my test is working again. I managed to fix that myself. So the idea here is it gives you that sort of nudge, if you like, to be able to say, how can I start to really work through this? Okay, now that's covered quite a lot, but there's still one more, which is kind of for us, it's a beta feature at the moment. It's generative AI. It's AI authoring. So how can I start writing tests or have the platform write tests for me, even if I'm not using our syntax? What if I just put in more natural language, sort of requirement-based commands, for example? Now, this is a beta, and this is not perfect for some of the reasons I alluded to before. No 2 applications are the same. Maybe things haven't quite loaded yet. There are a number of reasons, but it's getting pretty good at what you can do using AI to author tests. It is an enabler as far as I'm concerned, and it is something you would probably say, lay down the base of test steps, but then I might go and say, I might have to refactor those, so adjust them slightly, but it's done a pretty good job for me. So what this allows you to do, for example, I could come in and say, well, I want to put in a customer name, I want to toggle the active customer, and I want to enter in dates, but I don't want to write the test steps for that. So I could select a region on the screen. You don't have to do this, but it just sort of targets where you want to go. I could say, enter the customer name. I could then come in and say, I want it to click the toggle next to active customer. And then I want it to enter dates for 30th of May in US format, for example, because I know that's the format you have to use. So I've just put in sort of more free form text there. Haven't used the natural language that we use, and I've just sort of said, can you go and write that for me? And AI comes through and starts generating test steps. I can add those into the journey, and now let's go and look at how those run. So it's written the name, put the dates in, but if I look, it didn't toggle the active customer. So it's not perfect. And if I go and click on active customer and look at the screenshot, I can see, it's actually tried to click that active customer. So this is where I might need to adjust that and say, I've looked for that active customer. And then I might say, click on the checkbox, for example. And I know it's a checkbox, and I've cheated here a little bit because I've got access, if I want, into the dev tools. I could click on that particular element. And I know that if I do that, it will show me that it's actually the type of element is a checkbox. We'll see that in just a second. So basically, I can come in and I could hover over that particular element in a second, and it will tell me that, there we go, that it's a checkbox. So you can see it down here, it's telling me it's a checkbox type. So now what I can do is I can say, let's take out that step to click on the active customer. And again, what I can do there is just rerun the test from that point. And you can see now it's toggled that on. So it's basically written the test steps for me. I had to refactor them a little bit, but it did a really nice job. I could then say, maybe I want it to go and fill in these 3 fields. I know the values. So I want to say, pick the values from the following dropdowns. And I could say, div 1 from division. I could say IPZZ001 from product and RL from producer. But again, I haven't really adhered to our natural language at all. Virtuoso is natural language. I'm giving it what I know the action is, almost like I'm describing how I would do it. And it's gone ahead and suggested the test steps, and it goes ahead and drives those for me. So this is a beta for us. We're still sort of refining this, and we intend to keep on doing so, but you can straight away start to see how I didn't know what the test steps were, but it's gone ahead and written those for me, and they work very nicely. Even if I had to, up here, let's say refactor, or it might be I want to change the data. So I could say, well, it didn't pick the right data, so I'll just refactor that. Again, this is a productivity tool to lay down the base and then help you really sort of speed how you work at things. So you can see very quickly, in the space of just me, including me sort of talking through on this webinar, we've authored a test that logs in, opens an application, creates a customer with some bespoke functions to create random data, showed you how self-healing works, then goes and does a data-driven portion to create a customer. And then we've done generative AI to go and interact with the form field and start basically writing test steps, which at the same time is actually teaching me how the natural language works. So those are 7 key ways, and we're continuing to add more. We've actually added another one, which is about to be released, which is for giving you more execution summaries over time. And we're continuing to add in further and further to this, where for us, the real benefit of this is, it's, again, we don't see this as, suddenly it's going to be this autonomous bot that just goes off and does stuff. It's a supercharging your testing, your automated testing, which can help you. It's not so much reducing your personnel costs, it's more reducing costs per testing. So you can have people being more productive, reduce the cost per test, improve your long-term business performance, particularly with that maintenance piece, particularly with the fact you can easily run regression tests on an ongoing basis. You can improve test coverage and quality. You can get faster in terms of delivery, and with the return on investment you put into your testing, reduce maintenance, perform digital transformation. If you're deploying lots of new applications, you can do that at speed, but with quality, but also everybody starts to be able to participate in quality. It's not hidden in code or behind a very hard to understand framework or platform. And testers are more empowered, maybe in part in automation, but also feedback we get is people love the fact that if I can get the automation done, I can get back as a tester to doing what I love doing, QA, real hands-on to do that stuff that you probably would never try and automate. So hopefully that has been really insightful as a session for you. Q&A, and I do see that there are a couple of questions coming in, and do feel free to put in the chat. So the first one is, and someone who I think has used or seen our platform before, which is, we used to have a feature called vCapture, which someone's asking, why is that no longer accessible? Now, for your information, we dabbled around for a while with putting a recorder into the platform, which was called vCapture. And we just understood, like most recorders, is they just don't work very well, not because they're not sort of great attempts at technology, but more because of things like ambiguity. If I've got multiple buttons of the same name and a recorder just captures the button name, it has a very hard time finding that button. But also in recorders, you kind of, you've got mixed modes of testing where you're recording, re-recording, then I have to put in my assertions and my validations. We actually just found that it created more problems than it solved, and we're dedicated to being a natural language platform. So it's why we've actually removed vCapture. How can I get the recording? The recordings are actually on the website. So if you go onto our website, and I'll just jump on there, then you can see all the recordings for all our webinars. You can actually watch back through on the website. You can see all of them. You can watch now on the website if you want to go back through. This webinar will be posted here as well, but if you want to watch this one or any previous ones, jump on our website, resources, webinars, you can watch the webinar. Question being asked is, any customer data used to train your AI? Now, the answer here is we aren't using, for the generative AI, we're using external models, the business plans of OpenAI. We do not pass customer data. We're not actively having it train models, and data is not used in those plans to train the models. We're using it as is. So what we actually do, we're not just passing this straight through to AI. We're actually collecting information, stripping out the data, and passing in just what we need to be able to run the specific capabilities. Where in fact, the only real things we're actually passing through to external sources are more things like the test step and intent and immediate DOM structure. For those things like our self-healing and the object identification, those are our own models. They exist with us. So they're not external, but again, we're not using customer data to train that. And it's all offline trained. So we're just looking at the outputs, but we're not passing data into those. We're more than happy to share more details around things like data security. We are a SOC 2 Type 2 platform, and we do have security statements around how we use AI. A question around, is there any plan to improve the requirement and Gherkin format inputs and create test steps using AI? So for your information, you can actually create and upload requirements. So it could be Gherkin syntax, and generate the structure of tests from requirements. And that's not really creating the test itself. It's just laying down the foundation so I can write the tests. But this is a really interesting question, because this is actually where we see generative AI going next, is to be able to pass in a requirement to AI and start having it suggest to me not just individual segments of a test, but more maybe a wizard-based approach. So I can sequentially go through and use my requirements to generate my tests from, but validate that in a sort of human in the loop way to be able to make sure that it's working. So we actually have another hackathon coming up in another few months with our engineers, where the focus is on going to be enhancing what we do with generative AI. And we see using requirements as intent to be able to create test automation using AI is probably one of the massive capabilities that's definitely coming. A question here around AI authoring for existing users. It's still in beta and not available for all users. So the answer, basically the question is, when will that be in production? If you would like to utilize that, understanding it's beta, get in touch with your account manager. It's just a toggle. We can actually switch it on, but we will have to make you understand that it is in beta. We do anticipate very shortly having that in a full production mode. We want to make sure it works as best as possible in all cases. But if you do want to have a go, then definitely reach out to your account manager. We can bring you into the beta program. A question around, besides web testing, is it possible to test mobiles, Windows apps, APIs, mainframe? So the answer is no, not to all of those. We are focused on browser-based application testing. We don't test things outside of a browser, at least functionally. We don't test mobile apps. You can test mobile browser. So you can pass tests through onto a browser stack or Lambda test to run on real devices. It is through the browser. We do allow you to incorporate API calls. So you could do functional UI with API testing. So you could sort of combine the two. it's not really API testing per se, it's more could be APIs for test data. So set up an account or an opportunity via an API, then jump in the UI and go and manage that. So yeah, we are quite focused on browser and APIs. Would I be able to create a test against a Figma doc? Absolutely. You wouldn't directly take the Figma doc, but basically I could come in and say, instead of me using the live authoring, if I'm looking at a Figma doc that describes the requirements to me, I could turn off the live authoring because I'm working at the requirement stage. And simply then, if I've got a login flow that the Figma says there's going to be login that's typed login, I can start writing my natural language test steps before the code's even ready, referencing any sort of wireframes, designs, or other requirements. It's another great means to sort of that you don't have to have keywords or page object models because they may not exist yet. So you can start writing from the testing stage. A question around how much does it cost per one user? We're not user-based, it's not license-based. We are a cloud platform, so it's consumption. I would say reach out to us. I mean, for pricing, because basically it's going to depend on what sort of consumption levels you're going to need to utilize. So I'd say reach out to us and we'll very clearly be able to very quickly give you an idea of that. We're just as interested to make sure there's a return on value for you before we have too much of a conversation. How do you deal with page elements that are not exposed, that do not expose all interactive components, e.g. a canvas, which is only seen in the dev tools as a monolithic HTML element? So we do, so for your information around how we're working, so we are dependent on the DOM structure. So it's let's say if it's a graphical canvas, then we wouldn't be able to interact with the elements inside of that because it's graphical based. But if you do have the, if it is basically a DOM-based structure, that within that canvas, let's say it could be in Power BI, you've got a dashboard, which looks like a canvas, and you're, maybe you don't have the labels on the screen, but you want to interact. That's where you can come through. And if I just jump back into an example, you can basically hover over the screen or inspect at the through the dev tools to be able to find if there's an ID or a class you need to utilize, then you can actually jump into that and locate those. So just a very quick view of what that does. So long as it's DOM-based, even if the element isn't directly sort of exposed in terms of the name on the screen, you can still be able to interact by basically inspecting, looking in the dev tools and grabbing, let's say, a class name or a label or a name that's within the element structure. So I'll show you that to you in just a second. We've got videos on that on our YouTube channel as well. So I'll just let this restart and then show you an example of that. So I'll come back to that in just a second. And in fact, it's because I've got a couple of pages open elsewhere on this. So let me just restart this. I'll jump to the next one. I'll come back to this. I have a question. So AI automation test is supported in any package, or we must pay more to have that? I'll be honest with you, most of the, so all apart from the AI authoring, that's all in. The AI authoring, to be quite frank, part of the beta is us working out how we fit that into our commercial structure. Simply to be open, there's a cost to us for that. So we are working out what that means, but everything, albeit the generative AI authoring, so the object identification, the self-healing, the data, the journey summaries, the extensions, the journey summary piece, all of that is completely included in all of our packages. And we are just working out what it means in terms of the AI authoring as to how that fits into our commercial plans. Just to show you back again, if I go in here, so where I was talking about, let's say if I wanted to click on this image, I could go to the advanced tools, I could hover over and then look and see that this has, let's say, a name, which is login logo. So I could then say, click on the login logo, even though that wasn't exposed directly in the interface, I've got access into the dev tools to be able to head and go and interact with those. So back to that question around elements which aren't necessarily exposed directly in the interface. But again, if your question is about graphical canvases, we wouldn't be able to interact with that. Can this tool be useful for ETL data warehouse testing? If you are looking at that in conjunction with functional testing, I would say yes. So if I'm wanting to, let's say, access, could be a CRM or ERP or other data based platform, which I'm going to functionally test, then I want to interrogate either to get data or check the data is created in a data warehouse. If that can be done via API calls, even if it's by, let's say, having middleware, if it's going to be more of a query, a database query, then yeah, you could join up the functional testing with database testing using API calls to interact with databases or data warehouses. But I would say the four is really going to be, you're going to be sort of tying that together with your functional testing. And I know I'm going through here at speed, but there are quite a lot of questions, which is fantastic to see. As AI integration becomes increasingly prevalent in various products, test automation poses new challenges. One of the main difficulties is validating the output generated by AI, in that it produces non-deterministic results. How can we write assertions around non-deterministic output data using this platform? So a couple of things there is, one is that, as you're generating tests, it's not autonomous. So it is very much human in the loop to validate things are working as expected. But then you can do things like you can actually store data from the interface. And then essentially with testing, at the end of the day, you're checking to see with a given input, do I get a given output? So, and this is where AI is not your oracle. It's not going to know, is the output correct or not? That's the piece that really you have to sort of provide to this. So in somewhere in your test, you need to define what is the correct output. But then if you didn't know beforehand what the platform would create, a simple example could be you create a sales order and the system assigns a sales order ID, and I didn't know what that was going to be, then I can store the data coming from, so it could be store the value of login into login, for example, store element text rather. So I can basically store the data from the screen. So even if I don't know what that is, I can store it into a variable. And then whether I'm comparing that to a pattern, whether I'm making an API call to go and get what sits in the database to check what the UI and the database show are correct, or whether I can already know this is what should be created and I put that into my test data, I could combine storing data with an assertion. It could be an assertion to say that, assert that, I don't know, black equals expected value, for example. This is where you can actually go in and match together the generation of tests, the storing of data, or using test data with assertions to be able to check, basically, is your test for a given input, given expected output. That's a very quick answer, so I do encourage you, if you want to have a further discussion on that, please do reach out. How does Virtuoso handle routing for single page applications? So the nice thing is we're basically a bot, which is accessing from the front end just as a user would. So effectively, you're emulating a user coming in from the journey that they will take. So if you've got a single page application, which is being served up as you sort of go through interactions, then it's all occurring within inside the browser in the browser tab. And we're basically, the browser is taking care of basically the transitions between the pages or the way the page renders. And really what you're doing with the journey, if you like, the test is providing the flow that goes through as expected through that. And really then it's the browser that's handling the flow through the SDA in terms of how it loads. Now note that in terms of the loading of things, because of course I might be wanting to interact with something that hasn't been loaded yet, even though I showed you how we have these dynamic waits, we also have the ability to wait for network traffic. So if I have that enabled, particularly with a single page application, because we're expecting the server and the network to be loading something, if you say I want to click on a button that hasn't loaded yet, we'll see there's network traffic, wait for it to resolve, and then interact with it. Again, I may not have answered your question entirely, correctly how you want it there. Reach out to us though if you want to go into more details. How do you set up certificate PK12 to set APIs? Basically, you set up API calls very similar to how you would, let's say, if you're using an API testing tool, you can come and create your APIs, set up all the various parameters as you need to, including things like authorizations or headers, body, and so on. So it's very similar in that way. Just for information as well, as we are operating on the cloud, but then if you're needing to interact with applications behind the firewall, then we have either fixed IP or what we call a bridge client to create like a reverse tunnel to be able to interact. Again, if you've got a specific question there around that, we can go into more technical details. There are a few more questions. This is great. Is there any way of finding elements based on I want X but not Y? For example, 2 elements. So the answer is you can use different classes, and typically I would say if you're dealing with ambiguity where, let's say I've got a screen where I don't have an immediate example. Let's say you've got a table with 15 different records and all of them had an edit button on them, and you want the one on the 5th row down. You could say something like, look for record 1, 2, 3, because that's the record label that exists on row 5. And then the next step would be click on edit. And basically it's providing this contextualized ability to locate elements which could maybe not unique. That element, that edit button appears multiple times, but I'm tying it to something unique on the page, which is that row of the table that has a unique record ID, for example. You could use a class if you want, for example, and it could be the same thing. Maybe that edit icon doesn't have a label, it has a standard class. But again, writing that contextualized step, look for record 1, then in the next step, click on, class button, for example, then it deals with that ability to deal with ambiguity for common elements, even though you're not providing anything unique. Again, if that sounds at all interesting, it may not build an amazing picture for you there, but if you think that I'd like to look at that further, jump on our website and reach out. Happy to have a chat. Marcus, you've asked the question, how can I reach out to support? Basically, if you're with us, you reach out to your account manager. Otherwise, just jump onto our site. And if you jump on sort of get started, then you can come through here and put in your details. But you can also come through to chatting here, and that will get directly through to us. Within the platform, if you're in a trial as well, then we do have chat in here as well. So you can come and have a talk to us. How do you handle dynamics during test execution? That comes down to the self-healing. So for example, if the first time I picked a record on the table because I wanted to open, a sales order, I picked sales order 1, 2, 3, 4, but the next time that changes, the self-healing actually recognizes that actually what you wanted to do was pick the first record on the table, and the self-healing will automatically update to pick that value, even though the sales order number has changed. Or it could be you're given a dynamic value by the system that's assigned only when the test runs. Again, you could do that by storing data and then reusing it later in your test. Can you set up, and final one, can you set up test reports to generate daily so that you test it at a particular time? The answer is yes. So as you set up your execution plans, that's your orchestration plan, within there, you can also have it to set up notifications. So I could come in here and have it send me a report if it meets certain conditions. So I could say, if it's a failure, then go ahead and send an email. You could set up a Slack integration. We are also having more extended dashboard-based reports to be able to give insights as well as the health of tests. And we do have the ability for you to get reports out of the system now, but we're making that more so you can configure and customize those reports. And then, sorry, one more page. I noticed that if I use the advanced mode, the URL is incorrect when navigating through my SPA. I specify URL in my quest. If I specify a URL within my test, it does not navigate to it and cause it to fail. I would suggest reach out to us, Marcus, just for that one. Probably warrants someone actually having a look. It sounds like you're either a customer or in a trial. We'd be happy to jump in. You can give us the test step URL you're on, and we can basically give you some guidance exactly as to what's happening there. And that's part of the support we provide through our account management and supporting. Otherwise, as you can probably hear, I am almost out of my voice here. There's one more just come in. I'm going to say this, the final one. Can Virtuoso integrate with MS Teams? It can. We don't have an out-of-the-box integration, but essentially we're an open API. So whether by webhook, we did have a Teams integration, and it may still be available to some customers. To be honest, though, we found that with some particularly if you were tying it to execution results and you're running lots and lots of tests, you just start getting lots of alerts. So some people chose to actually just come into the platform. But the answer is you can pretty much integrate with anything because we're an open API via webhooks or middleware. Yeah. Otherwise, look, all I'm going to say is thank you very much to everybody who has attended. This has been a really great session. Just, I think, by the number of questions coming through, I think great engagement. The recording will be up on the website through our resources. Otherwise, come to our Get Started page if you would like to have a chat, look at our YouTube videos, look at a trial, or basically just say you want to come and have a talk with us. We're here to have a chat. So thank you very much, everybody. Really pleased to have run this. Wish you a good rest of the day, whether it's your morning, afternoon, or evening. And look out for the next webinar, which will be coming up not too distant future. Otherwise, have a really good day, everybody. Thank you very much.